Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, Stephen Ural, who's here to share with us his new book, Monthly Bill Payment Checklist, the 4-year individual and family budget guide, payment and expense tracker, emergency fund planner, early debt payoff scheduler, and map to financial freedom. Are you looking for a way to take control of your finances, but you're not sure where to start? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Stephen Ural holds a BS in ecology and an MBA in finance from Pennsylvania State University. A military veteran with a diverse professional background, including roles in international business finance at Pfizer, real estate investing, and the automotive industry, Stephen recently stepped away from social media to refocus on his true passion, writing to help others. His work reflects deep interest in spirituality, financial responsibility, and the simple joy of being outdoors. He believes personal finance and practical wisdom should be accessible to everyone, especially the lessons schools often leave out. So welcome to the show, Stephen Ural.
Thank you very much for having me, Maria.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this profound book. I mean, my goodness, what inspired you to write this?
I guess trying to help as many people was something that's really hard for so many people. Most people are living paycheck to paycheck. Credit cards are almost maxed out. Really don't have anything set aside, and financial stress can be really tough on people. So writing the book and teaching people, monthly bill and pay checklist is important, but it's also delving into the importance of building a budget, saving or cutting expenses, and then taking those savings to pay off debt early and then build an emergency fund. So it's really just a desire to help people do better at something that's critically important so they can have a happier, more fulfilling life.
So many people are struggling with debt. Why is early debt payoff so crucial? And how can this book help people get to a place that they can achieve that?
So early debt payoff is crucial because it can help your credit score, because it can free money up earlier. And since we are not obligated in most cases, most loans are simple interest loans. And as per federal law, if you pay them off early, you don't have to pay all that interest. So the other incentive is simply to save money. If you pay off a 6-year car loan in 4 years, you save a significant amount of interest money you would have had to pay if you went full term. So there's a financial incentive there.
Well, I'd like to touch on something that you mentioned, and that's emergency fund. And I think a lot of people, as you're saying, live paycheck to paycheck. They just don't have anything like that available. Why do you believe that this is such an essential part of financial health, and how your book really help readers build one?
So kind of going backwards and forwards, the beginning part of the book explains an emergency fund, which is in essence just that. It's money that you've accumulated that you only use in case of emergencies. The way we build emergency funds is by finding savings and expenses. And that really gets to budgeting and looking at every line item that you have. And we can talk about that perhaps later, but trying to find savings and expenses. And when you do that, you dedicate, if you follow the guidance from the book, you dedicate some of that savings every month to an emergency fund, and it just keeps accumulating. The importance of it is, as I like to say, when life happens, it will not ask you for permission. Unfortunately, we are not in control of things that happen to us in our lives. And when you have that emergency fund set up, which ideally is 1 year's worth of expenses, it's just a relief to know that the mortgage is paid, the rent is paid, the bills are paid. They're not going to come pick up your car. You're going to be able to make all those payments while you somehow, some way get through whatever has happened. It could be something like the company got sold and now you have to find another job. And that that just doesn't happen in a week or two. So that emergency fund is really important. And the book guides people through the process of setting money aside to actually build it.
Well, I really like how you structured your book into these 3 distinct sections. Can you walk us through what readers will find in each part?
Sure. So, and you're right, it really is by design 3 sections. So the first section is 9 short chapters on how we set income expectations for ourselves, how we build a budget, how we save on expenses. And we talked about an emergency fund. It explains what an emergency fund is, what it's for, why it's important. And then, of course, a chapter on why paying off debt early is so important and the benefits to us. So that's the first chapter or the first section of the book. Shouldn't take more than about 15 minutes to read. The second section is really neat because I'm a believer in a picture's worth 1,000 words. So we can talk about this all we want, but to actually see examples of how to build an annual budget, how to use the book to build your monthly budget, and then how to do a year in review. So I tell everybody that second section, which has examples, feel free to copy it verbatim when you're getting started. Literally use the expense categories and the expense line items as a guide to build your budget. And then, of course, you can tweak that over time. But that second section can really help people get started quickly. You don't need to procrastinate. You don't need to try to imagine how to build your budget. Those examples provide it for you. And then, of course, the third section is where you would enter your own financial information. And again, referring back to the examples that are provided in detail in the second section, just jump right into it. Open up to the blank monthly page and just put the month and year on top. Use the example as a template and start filling out your budget categories and your expense line items.
I'd like to touch on the second section because you include visual examples. How does
Sure.
this, yeah, so how does this enhance the learning process?
To me, we spend a lot of time thinking about building a budget and how to do that. And for me, the visual really makes it so much easier to just get started. So if we think about an individual or a family, we all have a family budget or an individual budget, and it's made up of different items. And for some people, even me years ago, I'm older now, but years ago when I was starting this whole process, where do we spend our money? All we know is we make money and we spend it, but where does it go? So that second section of examples starts building categories. It shows people the categories to build, like for household. What makes up a household budget? Well, if we're talking just housing, it could be rent, mortgage, insurance, the electric bill, water bill, sewer bill, Wi-Fi, cleaning supplies, etc. Then you can have another category for transportation. That could be a car loan, that could be insurance, gas, maintenance, repairs. So to me, the second section, if people spend some time kind of looking at that, it'll make the third section where they start putting in their information that much easier to build, if that makes sense.
It does. And thank you so much for taking the time to share that. One of the things I really appreciate about your book is that it includes 4 years of pages to record budgets. So, why does tracking finances for that length of time help people create lasting change?
It's a great question. And the 4 years is by design. I tell everybody when we start this, we're probably not starting in January, and that's no problem. You just start whatever month you're in. When you come to the end of that first year, it's titled Year in Review, and you have 2 pages where you analyze how you did versus your goals for income, expense categories, early debt payoff, and of course, the all important emergency fund. And over time, we just learn more about how we spend money and ultimately and ideally how we can save money. So what we find is that that first year is exciting because you're learning how to build a budget. You're actually seeing that you can save money. You can do more with less. You can see that you're putting that savings from cutting expenses into early debt payoff. That's saving you money. You're building an emergency fund, and people can look, 2, 3, 4 years down the road and see, holy cow, in 2 years' time or 4 years' time, I'm going to have an emergency fund. That's really important for me and or my family. And it's important to do it over the 4 years, because as we go through life, what if your family changes? You were single and now you're not, or you're a couple and now you have kids. So it's just, once you have the skills to build a budget, it's very easy to add another expense category. If you start having a family, then you add an expense category for children. And you'll just notice over time, it's incredibly fulfilling to look backwards in life sometimes. And I just imagine, as people are in the third year of the book or the fourth year of the book and looking back at how far they've come, is incredibly fulfilling to feel like financially they're breathing. They have some peace of mind. They can forecast into the future. If all things remain the same, in 5, 6 years, this is where I'll be, or this is where we will be. So it's almost, there's a nostalgic benefit to be able to look back over the years. And as your finances get better, if your credit score was challenged because debt was piled up and maybe some missed payments, but now you don't miss payments. Now stuff's getting paid off, that credit score improves. It's incredible to look at how your credit score changed over time, all through budgeting, paying debt off early, having that emergency fund, managing your income. So it's exciting to see that over time.
It's kind of rewarding to get that, see those stats as you continue to move forward.
Yes.
So, for those that are just starting out, you recommend copying the examples in the book to begin. Why is this a helpful first step?
Because it just gets rid of the procrastination. It's kind of like a New Year's resolution. We commit to these things in whatever month, and then the year comes around and life happens and we never really do it. So it's really helpful to have those examples, because it just gets rid of the procrastination, or if not that, just not knowing how to actually build a budget. It's helpful to see your monthly bill payment checklist, and you're checking them off. That's helpful. But building a budget can be confusing for people, because when we go through school, they teach us a lot, but they don't teach us how to raise kids, and they don't teach us how to manage money. So in my opinion, those examples are a great template to just help people immediately start that first month with the whole budget process. Instead of trying to figure it out or research how to build a budget, they're right there. Just use them, modify them like we talked about earlier as time goes on, and get started saving money, paying debt off early, building your emergency fund immediately.
So, you encourage readers to take things one step at a time. So, why is pacing so important when learning to manage personal finances?
Marianne, that's a great question. That's a great question, I'm glad you brought it up. Sometimes, if we think about it almost as if anybody out there exercises or involved in sports, we have to pace ourselves. Budgeting is not a sprint. This is a marathon. The challenge is just getting started. So that's one reason. It's a process that takes time, and it's important to understand that upfront.
Thank you for taking the time to share that with us. I really thought your book is so in depth and just so helpful for people that are looking to get on the right track or maybe don't even know where to start with budgeting. How can that this book help people focus to making budgeting feel less overwhelming?
Just by just by seeing that it can be done. And that kind of gets back to the examples. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to structure the book, and the examples just kind of dawned on me and said, because part of your question and part of the answer and part of the challenge is, well, okay, great. I know I need a budget. I'd love to save money. I'd love to pay that off early, but how do I do it? So those examples take that confusion away. You can look at them and you can see them, and it's almost like the light bulb goes off. It's like, holy cow, that's a picture on paper of my financial life. To me, it makes it easier to visualize. It eliminates the need to do research on how to build the budget because the examples are right there. And the other benefit is we can just get started right away because you already have the structure.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about budgeting?
I think the biggest one is, I think there are two. One is that they just can't do it. And I think that's a misconception. It doesn't matter if you're 18 or 58, you can build a budget. I think that's part of it. And the other one is it's too complicated. And I certainly understand that. We're all working 12 hours or more a day for so many of us. And we're working 5, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. When do I have the time to do this? It's too complicated, going to take too much time. And I think that's a reality, but hopefully the book simplifies that and kind of dispels that both of those realities. You can do it and you can find the time to do it.
In your experience, what's the turning point that helps someone go from like financially overwhelmed to financially confident?
I think the first time people realize that they can save money is a turning point. And I'll give you a quick example. On average, people spend $15 a day for lunch. They're either going out for lunch while they're at work or they're ordering in. And if you just took the time to plan meals at home ahead of time for the week, on average, you're probably spending maybe $2.50. So if we take the 15 per day, 5-day week, 4 weeks a month, that's $300 a month on lunch at work. And if you make those meals at home, it costs a lot less. And quite frankly, it's probably healthier. So if you can get that number down to $60 a month for lunch, because you're bringing lunch to work, you're saving $240 a month, $240 a month, which you can put to early debt payoff, an emergency fund, a combination of the two. And I think once people realize that they can save money, it becomes exciting because you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, the financial light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, okay, I can save. All right, well, that was pretty cool. I'm saving money each month just on this one item. I wonder how much more money I can save. I just need to identify another item. And it becomes almost addicting or thrilling in a good way to realize you can do it.
I think it would feel very rewarding to get to a place where it's like, hey, I've cut out coffee or these other little extras throughout our days, and how we can then use that money to offset our debt.
Exactly. And you mentioned another one, coffee. So many of us we drive to work and we stop and get coffee and $7, $8, $6, whatever it is per cup of coffee. And the alternative is just make it at home and take it to work. you know, and to your point, it's really fulfilling when people realize, okay, this isn't so hard. I can do it. There are all sorts of little things that I don't even realize I'm spending money on that I'm not even using, like TV show or movie subscriptions. People have 3 or 4 of them, but they really aren't utilizing them. So once people get started and find that first expense line item and realize they can save money, and it's not like they're dramatically worsening their lives, it's actually improving, then it becomes really exciting it's almost like an Easter egg hunt or digging for gold. Once you find that first one, you're just more motivated and excited to find more, and you will and you can.
How do you recommend families use this book together?
I think that's probably the most exciting part. Finances for so many people, we talked about it earlier, living paycheck to paycheck. Credit cards are getting maxed out and really don't have any sort of a financial fallback like an emergency fund. And that stress can unfortunately have a negative effect on relationships. And that's not the point of a relationship. It's supposed to be a happy place, supposed to be a happy thing when you're spending that time with somebody else as we go through life together. So for couples getting started, it's definitely a couples exercise. And you may have somebody who has absolutely zero interest in the money side of it, but will be incredibly relieved to feel like as a couple, the finances are more under control, or both people may be interested. And either scenario is exciting and fulfilling because, let's take the scenario two people sit down together and figure it out. It ends up becoming more of a bonding relationship. You're in it together. And now, from a financial standpoint, you're in that together as well. You're both learning. You're both enjoying each other's contributions to that. Even like I said before, if one person says, "Listen, I trust you with it. I was horrible at math in school. I just don't understand it. But I'm so grateful you're willing to do it to help both of us." So I can't help but think, and this is from experience too, as couples get their finances more under control, that helps make the relationship stronger. I mean, we talked earlier about kind of looking back 4 years or 3 years or 2 years down the road to see how far you've come as a couple. It's just an incredibly rewarding thing. And if that couple decides to have a family, of course, that's a skill set, an incredibly important life skill set that they can pass on to their kids.
Now, is this something that families can use as a teaching tool for their children, for their teens?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter if you're 18 or 58, when it would be so helpful for a young person as they go off to school, so they're out of the nest, they're going off to school. And at some point, they're going to have a job. They may be working while they're at school, but certainly when they graduate, to have that book and that skill set to understand, okay, this is how I set an income goal. This is how I build my family budget. Of course, it changes over time. They're going into life with a financial skill set that's so helpful and so beneficial. How to make good financial decisions. They'll learn about credit. They don't teach us about credit scores growing up either, but for those that have the book and they see the credit score improve, that's something they can pass on to their kids. And to your point, as those young people go off to school and graduate, there's so much further ahead financially, not just financially, but from a quality of life and a decision-making standpoint as well.
So, we often hear about financial freedom. How do the steps in your book help people move closer to that goal?
Every step we take that gets us away from living paycheck to paycheck, you know, not having an emergency fund of expenses set aside for when life happens. Every step we take away from that is a positive step forward in the right direction to financial freedom. And what happens is financial freedom to me is the ability to make decisions in our life that can be life changing in a good way. When you have, for example, your debt under control, you're saving money, you have an emergency fund with a year's worth of expenses, let's say, set aside, you may be able to make a job decision that you weren't in a position to make before. What if there's a job that's in another part of the country and that it's difficult to relocate? But if you have the financial ability to do that because you have a budget, because you're able to plan, because you're managing your debt well, have this emergency fund, you can make that transition. You can look further down the road. What's going to happen is people start not just budgeting those line items, but they're looking at how much they're saving and how debt free they are. You imagine paying a car off in 3 years instead of 6 years. That's 3 years worth of payments that they can allocate to something else. And that really does get people on the path to financial independence and financial freedom.
What advice would you give to someone who feels embarrassed about their finances and maybe is even a little afraid to begin?
The first word of advice is don't worry about what anybody else thinks. That's the best. It took me decades in my life to figure that little nugget of information out. Um, you're the most important thing on the planet. You really are. Nobody's going to love you like you. So once you can make that transition and realize, listen, it doesn't matter what my parents think, my siblings think, my friends think. This is important to me. It's exciting for me. It's fulfilling for me. Just go ahead and do that. And what I found over time is people talk a game. They may pick, oh, you're frugal, but in the back of their minds, they're realizing they're probably not as frugal as they need to be. So what you'll find over time, and this is from my experience, people start asking you questions. Say, hey, are you actually saving money? Is it working? Give them positive feedback, and you'll be surprised to see how many of the hecklers turn into budgeters themselves.
That's really good to know. It just makes sense to handle things in a very responsible way.
Yes, yes, and sometimes handling things in a responsible way doesn't get all the credit it deserves. But again, referring back to your earlier question, if you're embarrassed about your situation, you're embarrassed what people may think, you're not alone. I think most people are not comfortable with their financial situation. It's just an opportunity to kind of stand out and lead by example and show people, hey, this is important. We can do it. Let's just get started with it.
What would you like readers and our listeners to take away from your book?
The first thing is that they can do it. You can build a budget. You can set income goals. You can find savings, pay debt off early, build an emergency fund, and that will absolutely get you on a path to financial independence and financial freedom. So that's the most important takeaway. You can do it, and you can get started today. It's not that complicated. The examples show you the way. Just copy them into your own budget template and get started. Just be positive. Positivity in the face of adversity. You can do it. Keep a smile on your face, plug away at it. This is something you can start immediately, see immediate benefits from, and just stick with it long term. And, looking back over time, you'll have an absolutely amazingly positive story to tell and share with others.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Marianne, thank you so much for having you. I appreciate everything you do and just reaching out to people through your big platform and providing people such helpful advice. Thank you so much again.
Well, thank you, Stephen. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Monthly Bill Payment Checklist. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.